And welcome back, listeners. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Invisible Threat Podcast. And as is becoming normal, and as always, I am joined by my esteemed co-host, Dr. Matt Eby, and his co-author of The Invisible Threat, Joanne Eby, who has become quite the regular on our show. So we're very, very pleased to have them on the road, actually, with us today. Matt, Joanne, how are you guys doing today?
We're doing great. Yeah, we're here and on our way to where are we headed to? Zion's.
We're in Utah.
In Utah. So really looking forward to that. And for my first time there, even though that we lived in Las Vegas for many years, and it's our first opportunity actually where we have the time to actually go and visit Zion. So I heard it's fantastic and really looking forward to it. So yeah, good to see you again, Carter.
Yeah, and you promised me to take lots of pictures because I've heard it's really cool. And from the sound of it, it sounds like it's not the easiest to get to. So I might not ever go. So at least I can get some pictures from you guys.
We'll do that for sure. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And, it was kind of cool that on your way from Vegas, you came into Phoenix. We got a chance to have dinner this week. So we've seen each other now twice in like the last 4 or 5 weeks?
Always great to be together and to see Christina. And also, we talked in our last episode about the story of us getting together. So we got to see Earl and his wife, and all very good stuff. So shout out to Earl and his wife, Marlena, very excellent people. And can't even believe that there was a chance that we weren't going to not only work together, but become really great friends and such fantastic people. So really awesome for us to get together and to share some time and talk about all the things that we've learned and opportunities to share time and all the stories for sure.
Yeah, and especially as we continue to move forward and everything. Well, hey, listeners, you guys are in for a treat. We kind of, left off a little bit in our last episode, alluding to what we were going to be talking about today. So in episode 11, we got very close to the individual versus the organization, right? We realized something that's hard to unsee. Judgment doesn't live in the policy, right? It doesn't live in the document, right? The trust document specifically. It lives in the person who's actually exercising their discretion. But if that's true, then I think we've got a bigger problem because people don't operate in a silo, in isolation, right? They operate inside these institutions, these financial institutions. So the question becomes, how much of that judgment is really theirs?
As you're describing, Carter, we really talked first about judgment itself, and we were at a distance. And then we were talking about the individual and how they actually make the judgments, etc. And then it really winds up where, or individuals they work inside of institutions, and that's the next layer. Because once you see that judgment forms in the individual, you start to notice something else. The individual is being shaped, not occasionally and not incidentally, but continuously by the institution that they're part of, that they're in.
And Matt, not just the institution in a general sense, the type of institution matters. The charter, that trust charter matters. The regulatory regime matters. The business model matters. Those are not just background conditions. They are direct determinants of how judgment is formed.
We're not just talking about different policies, right? We're talking about different forms of judgment depending on where you sit.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Carter. It's the same fiduciary, and it's the same fact pattern in the cases that they're dealing with. Put them in 4 different institutional environments, and you'll get 4 different tendencies for judgments they make. Not because one is right or one is wrong, but because each system is influenced by different parts of the compass, by the fiduciary compass that we've been discussing.
Okay, well, then let's start with the one most people are familiar with: large national banks that are regulated by the OCC. Let's start there and let's discuss what's happening in that scenario, in that situation, those institutions.
Well, OCC chartered institutions tend to be highly structured environments. There are formal governance expectations with potentially many levels: committees, documentation standards, audit trails, and critically, regulatory scrutiny. Everything you do as a fiduciary there has to be explainable under examination.
Exactly, which changes how judgment forms. Because you're no longer just asking, what's the right thing to do? You're asking, can I defend this? Will this judgment, will this decision hold up under scrutiny? How will this be viewed by someone who's not in this room at this point in time?
So, that's actually, really interesting. The defensible position is what you're really talking about there, right? So the judgment starts getting built for review.
Yeah, for scrutiny, right? So, and that amplifies the compass dimensions, specifically anchors and risk. The document becomes central. Precedent becomes stabilizing factor, and risk becomes something to manage before it actually materializes.
From a regulatory standpoint, that makes sense. The expectation is consistency, prudence, and protection of beneficiaries over time. But it also creates a bias.
Well, that's an interesting word that you use there, a bias. So when you say a bias, what kind or kinds of bias are we talking about?
Well, we see it frequently in these OCC chartered institutions. It's that bias toward defensibility. They know they need to defend the decisions that they made in the face of that examination scrutiny.
Yeah, that's right. And that maps directly to what I call the prudent fiduciary or the steward. They're highly controlled, highly disciplined, but the risk is
Yeah, let me guess. The safest answer starts to feel like the right answer.
that's exactly right.
So now contrast that with a state chartered independent trust company. What changes from that perspective?
Well, size and structure reduce, right? I mean, the state independent trust company is much smaller than that national entity that we talked about, the OCC, the national player, right? And it's not entirely that there is, significantly smaller. There are fewer layers, there's less formal committee dependency, and a fiduciary may actually see the owner of a bank on a daily basis and call them by their first name, which means
Which means the fiduciary holds more of the judgment themselves.
yeah, that's exactly right. They're responsible. There's no system to absorb the tension. So the person making the decision, the fiduciary themselves, becomes the system.
And in looking at it from a legal standpoint, that doesn't reduce responsibility, it concentrates it.
Right.
Now the question isn't, will this hold up, right? Like the national bank.
Yeah, you're right, Carter. It becomes, can I personally stand behind this?
Yeah, and that starts to feel very different, and obviously comparing, contrasting those two different independent versus the more recognized national bank OCC oversight. Then,
Yeah, it very much feels different because now the compass dimensions of identity, fairness, and emotion come forward. You are interpreting the document, balancing beneficiary needs in real time, and managing the human side of that particular decision.
And without structured consistency, fairness becomes more contextual, which can be appropriate, but it also is variable.
Yeah, this is where you see what I call the principled fiduciary, the guardian of the trust.
So it always makes me harken back or think to some of the actual documentation language when you start thinking about trust protector when you're speaking that way, right? So the strength is flexibility to what the situation actually calls for in each individual case.
But the risk is now subjective inconsistency.
Okay, now then let's move into an environment that is growing fast, right? Trust companies that are affiliated with, wealth management, right? RIAs and broker dealers maybe. But so what's the difference there?
Now you're integrating fiduciary judgment with investment strategy. The trust decision isn't isolated anymore to what's specifically best for the beneficiaries. It's connected to the portfolio, to investment performance, and long term planning.
Okay, all right. So the decision isn't just should we distribute something, right? It's also what does this do to the investment strategy? Am I being fiduciarily responsible and trying to get the most upside potential, so to speak, or whatever that might be, whatever the investment strategies it might be, correct? So those are two different, almost contrasting ideas.
It amplifies risk and identity, the dimensions on our compass, in different ways. Risk becomes something to calibrate, not just avoid. And identity becomes something tied to advisory capability.
And legally, that introduces tension because fiduciary duty has to remain clear even as advisory considerations come into play.
That could potentially open up a whole different can of worms, right? So there's a blending that's happening between those two mindsets, if you will.
Yes. And that aligns with what I call the contextual fiduciary or the strategist. They're forward looking, integrative, but the risk is more subtle.
Well, what about is there any potential mission drift?
Yeah, the fiduciary role can start to blur with the advisory role. And then we specifically have seen where we have questions about who's the client.
Well, okay, and then there's the broker dealer world, right? So we mentioned RIAs obviously earlier, but in the broker dealer world, a very different environment altogether.
Yes, it's a completely different regulatory framing. On the broker dealer side of the world, things are more transactional, more focused on execution and suitability for the account.
And that changes the cadence of judgment. It becomes faster, more responsive, more situational.
Yeah, so less about long-term stewardship, as you kind of mentioned earlier, right? And more about real-time alignment, I'm assuming.
Yep. And that amplifies fairness and identity again. But now fairness is about appropriateness and proportionality in the moment.
And the legal standard reflects that. You're often operating within suitability or best interest frameworks, not always traditional fiduciary continuity.
And this aligns with what I call the dynamic fiduciary, the advisor.
Strength being agility.
Yeah. And the risk being blurred boundaries.
So let me go ahead. I'm just going to take a step back. Same person, different institution, different judgment.
Not just different outcomes, different construction of judgment itself.
And that's the part the industry often misses. We regulate institutions, but we don't always recognize how those structures are shaping the decision maker, the person, the individual making that decision.
So when something goes wrong, obviously we look at the person.
When we should be looking at the system.
That right there, that's a really, really big shift.
It is. Because now the question isn't, was this decision right? It becomes, What produced this decision?
Yeah, so if the individual is shaped by the institution and the institution is shaped by its structure or its incentives, its charter, then what's shaping the institution?
Well, on the institutional side, regulation comes into play, legal frameworks, and supervisory expectations.
And industry norms, what we collectively accept as objective.
So we've moved from the individual to the institution.
To the system that defines the rules of the game.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that system might not be as neutral as one would think.
It isn't.
And once you see that, you start to realize even objectivity has a source.
And that's where we go next. Most institutions move past these steps. We don't. I want to thank you, all you listeners, for joining us for another phenomenal episode of the Invisible Threat podcast. And I am so excited about continually moving forward on this, giving all of this wealth of knowledge and information from my two amazing co-hosts, Dr. Matt Eby and Joanne Eby. And I am so thankful that you continue to come back over and over again. Make sure wherever you do get your podcast too, make sure you subscribe so you can get it really, really easy, right? That might be Apple, Spotify, Google. There's all kinds of different places to get your podcast. So, Matt, Joanne, thank you so much for, again, a wonderful extrapolation of not only your dissertation, but also how you weave it in with all of that shared experience that the two of you have.
Thanks so much for accommodating our time schedule here, Carter, even though that the listeners don't know we adjusted this for everybody, and also to everybody else involved. We are looking forward to our day today, and we'll send you pictures. And also, I know that you have a big week ahead of you. So thanks so much, everybody. And thanks for listening. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll continue onward and upward, as they say.
For my esteemed colleagues, Dr. Matt Eby and Joanne Eby, I'm Carter Wilcoxson, your host here at the Invisible Threat Podcast and CEO and founder of Epic Services Company, wishing you all a wonderful day, and we will see you next time on The Invisible Threat. Thank you, everybody.